Duke is a Big 12 school. That sentence is one that I don't think is that foreign, considering 3 entities are now suing the ACC. Their TV contract could go away by 2027 if ESPN decides to drop it. And overall, the conference adding Cal, Stanford, and SMU does not push the needle enough to keep the college football playoff revenue alive moving forward. There are certain things pointing at the ACC going away, and I believe that Duke and the Big 12, especially given Duke's revenue numbers, can come to an agreement moving forward to have a partnership and involve the Blue Devils in the conference. What say you?
For sure. I think it makes sense. I think the fit would be great. I think, as we talked about a little bit earlier here today, Drake, you want to make sure that you're thinking about what's next. And Vincent Price, is the president for Duke, has done a good job with that. Nina King has been awesome in her time as the athletic director, right? I think about Coach K holding his position for 42 seasons, announcing a year prior that he's going to retire. And then all of a sudden the athletic department has to think about what's next and what's the move that you make. So they're able to go and get somebody like John Shire to have a full year kind of running up to being the full-time head coach. I use that to say Duke is definitely probably thinking about what is next in that regard. And if it is a landing spot like the Big 12, I think you have to be satisfied with that, because at the end of the day, this Duke brand is going to carry wherever it is.
Is there any way that Duke makes it into the Big Ten or the SEC?
I think it's hard to think of that world, especially when you think about the SEC. And while the SEC of the two geographically is way more appealing, right? I think when you look at what Duke has done on the football field, you've got to be honest with yourself and realize that that's just not a perfect marriage to be had there. And then from the Big Ten perspective, academically, a little bit more aligned. Basketball, I think of somebody like Michigan State, who Duke sees every few seasons in the Champions Classic to get the season started. I think about what Michigan has done with their program over the years and that sort of thing. The Big Ten from the basketball level could be great. But I don't know that Duke, again, is going to hold up too much weight when it comes to the football perspective and where all of that would fall.
Brand, prowess, valuation, those are hard words for a lot of the schools that exist, not just in the Big 12 and the ACC, but also at the bottom of the SEC and the Big 10. I mean, as consolidation becomes a thing, it's not a good time to be Mississippi State or Northwestern or Purdue. And so it's not that Duke has a bad standing in college football. It's just the Big 10 and the SEC want the elite 20, 25 schools, and Duke is just on the outside looking in, as many Big 12 teams are. But one thing I'll give you for hope here, and I give this to a lot of programs, Clemson 15 years ago had the same revenue numbers as Boston, or not Boston College, Bowling Green, even worse. Bowling Green. And then they just won. Anybody can win their way to relevance in college football. That's how it works. However, the opposite also applies. You can lose your way to irrelevance. JJ, given the next 5 years, let's go hypothetical, Duke basketball is still great, but football goes back to what football has been historically, which is not good, subpar, bad. Can you hold weight in a power conference? I mean, is there a way to justify Duke being in a power league if football is not there and those revenue dollars don't come in?
It gets really hard, right, when we're thinking about what these power leagues become, because we put the numbers up of where Duke ranks inside the top 30 with these schools. It's really hard to figure out where exactly Duke fits into that picture. However, the brand that it's created on the basketball floor is certainly spectacular. I think Duke men's basketball proudly promotes frequently of athletic institutions and programs that are out there. The Duke men's basketball social media following has the largest engagement and viewership than anybody, than Ohio State football, Alabama football, that have been leading the way. I mean, Duke has done an amazing job of promoting what it's really, really good at. And so even if we have a 5-year stretch of poor football once again, I think basketball is going to be fine because of the history that it can fall back on. They're still recruiting at a high level. It's an Elite Eight team this past season. So I don't see the fall off being that crazy. Just at the end of the day, if you're Duke, there are worse options out there among Power 5 teams that these new conferences are going to be choosing from. And I think Duke should feel a little bit secure that they're not going to be the last pick at recess.
Man, I'm glad you mentioned too earlier in the show, Duke's brand extends far past what Duke is. I mean, in the best way possible. You want to be a T-shirt school here. You want people to be walking around in a Walmart in Spokane, Washington, wearing a Duke shirt who have no relation to Duke. They just think the basketball team is cool. That plays well for you in expansion. And I do think the Blue Devils have that kind of brand. But JJ, here's the tough one. Like Utah, a year ago, was ready to stay in the Pac-12 and find a way to make it work. In the end, George Kliavkoff's leadership ends up destroying the conference, and Utah has to come to the Big 12. I'm not sure the Utes would have picked up the phone that day and said, sure, we'll come to the Big 12 before they figured out where the Pac-12 was going. If the calls made from Brett Yormark to Duke today to say, come to the Big 12, is it worth taking, or is there still room to feel out the ACC?
I think I think the phone's still on do not disturb, Drake. I think ultimately when it's all right now, at least, Duke is still trying to wave this ACC flag and still holding on to the fact that they were a founding member of the conference over 70 years ago and want to see it continue and move into this new phase with 3 teams being added to the fold and the geographic footprint continuing to expand and that sort of thing. I don't know that it's too entertaining here today. But as we know, I think back to being at SEC Media Days a few years ago when we get the big bombshell news that Oklahoma and Texas are set to join the SEC. Things can change on a dime. And with that being said, if we see the likes of Florida State and Clemson start to make the pool and go elsewhere, then we'll take the phone off Do Not Disturb. We'll start entertaining some of those phone calls and trying to figure out what life could be like after this.
That's JJ Jackson of Locked On Blue Devils. Drake Toll with you from Locked On Big 12. Thanks for making both of our shows your first listen every single day. Come back tomorrow and next week as we talk more transfer portal, not just on the gridiron, but also in basketball. Shout out Jeremy Roach and Sick'em Bears. This has been and always will be Locked On Blue Devils and Dose Grande.